think we can get underway. So good evening and welcome to our Historical Society program. As I said, I'm Kathy Cavallari. I'm the president of the Westborough Historical Society. I'm delighted you joined us this evening. Just as a bit of an introduction for the society, the Westborough Historical Society was founded in 1889 to preserve local history through research programs and the preservation of artifacts. Our headquarters is the Sibley House, an 1844 Greek revival home of the slaymaker William Sibley, located at 13 Parkman Street. And inside the house, we house 3 centuries of artifacts of Westborough history, dating back to the founding of the town in 1717. And for more than a century, the Society's mission has been to celebrate local history and bring that history to life through our monthly presentations, Sibley House tours, and special events. And currently we're scheduled, for our members, we've offered them the ability to just book a tour at this point, and we hope to have some open houses as time goes on. So getting a private tour would be a benefit of membership. If you enjoyed tonight's program, which I'm sure you will, we invite you to like our Facebook page, which is Westborough Historical Society, and check out our website, www.westboroughhistory.org. And you can also become a member through our website, and we encourage that. And our membership is very affordable, and we have a couple parties too during the year, so there's some benefits. Now, as I said, we're going to take questions in the chat tonight, just a couple housekeeping details. So I will either raise them during the presentation if appropriate, or we can talk about them at the end. And the program is being recorded, so they usually only show speakers, but if you wanted to turn your video off or whatever, leave it on it, I'm sure either way will be fine. And our presenter tonight, as you can see, is Robert Stacy. Robert has studied at the University of New Hampshire and Harvard University. He's currently on the staff of the Worcester Historical Museum, and he is the site manager for the Salisbury Mansion, which is Worcester's only historical house museum. He has published articles for reference books, chapters for textbooks, and several book reviews. And in April, he will once again be leading walking tours of Revolutionary Worcester, where you can view in person some of the places he's going to describe tonight. One of our board members did go on such a tour, and that's why we're doing this program. The Salisbury Mansion can currently be toured and is open Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays at the moment from 1 to 4 p.m. And more information is available at the Worcester Historical Museum website, which is www.worcesterhistory.org. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Robert Stacy.
Thank you very much, Kathy. What we're going to do this evening is I am going to present a virtual tour of the walking tour that we have of Revolutionary Worcester, focusing on the events primarily in 1774, but talking about a few other events and personalities. The tour can be accessed live and in person, starting on Patriots Day, April 18th. We're going to be resuming our walking tours, which take just a little over an hour, and they start at Salisbury Mansion, and then we conclude there after going down Main Street a little way and talking about some of the personalities. You can also take a virtual tour online at www.revolutionaryworcester.org. And so we invite you to join us. We'll be having the walking tours about every 2 weeks, right up until November. So, Peter, I think I need to take control of
You can share a screen right away.
I can share a screen from here?
Yes.
Ah, yes. Very good. All right. So this is Revolutionary Worcester, and as I say, it is a virtual walking tour. Worcester, as you all know, I expect, was the Shire town for Worcester County. It was chosen as the Shire town primarily because of its location. There were towns that were larger. Lancaster in the 18th century was larger, as was Sutton, and as was Brookfield. But it was on the Boston Post Road. Now, this is a Ralph Earl painting of Worcester, circa 1800. And you see the little road here. This is coming down from Shrewsbury. The perspective is from Denny Hill in Leicester, and you see the Boston Post Road. Now, the steeple that you see here is the first meeting house, and we'll be discussing that in a little bit. And just to further orient you, the buildings that you see right here, this is Lincoln Square, or what became Lincoln Square.
Robert, if I could interrupt, is it possible you could use slideshow? That might make
I can try that. For some reason, I have had difficulties with slideshow and Zoom. So why don't we try it? And then if it doesn't work, I'll go back to, I will go back to what we have here. Can you see that?
Nothing has changed. I guess, yeah, whatever. Well, whatever. It's not really making a slideshow.
Let me try one more slide. We've got the view of Worcester. Do you see the map?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So this is Worcester at about the time of the Revolution, and you can see what was in those days rather inelegantly referred to as Bladder Pond, which is now Bell Pond. This is somewhat after, so we've got the second parish meeting house. The first parish was the meeting house, and that was the only church in Worcester at the time. The printing office is where Isaiah Thomas eventually set up his print shop in about 3-building complex, and there, of course, is the courthouse. This is on Lincoln Street, and this is from the far end of that Ralph Earl painting that you saw. This, of course, is the DAR chapter house. This is
okay. We're still looking at the map.
Okay. Did it change?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna put it back. Unfortunately.
Okay, that's fine. Do what works.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. This is the DAR chapter, and this is a marker. This is on Lincoln Street, which comes right down into what was, what is now Lincoln Square. Now, this is the original site of the Salisbury Mansion, which is one of the focal points in 1774, at the time that as writers like Ray Raphael claim, that the revolution actually started. So this park-like affair right here, this is where the War Memorial Auditorium is now. This is Grove Street, and this is where the Boys Club is. Now, Worcester settled from the north down to south. So there really wasn't too much in the way. There are a couple of isolated buildings, but for the most part, all the way out to Holden was about 150 acres under cultivation that belonged to Stephen Salisbury, land that he actually bought from John Hancock in 1771. So that you also see here the balustrade on top, and Stephen Salisbury could have climbed up to the roof, and looking down south, down Main Street, he could have seen the entire process by which the royal court was closed, and by which the 37 militia companies, Westborough included, of course, were on either side of the street and created a gauntlet through which the royal magistrates had to pass. And this is it in its current location. I will put in right now a plug for us. Some of your board members will be coming to visit on Saturday, and we will be very happy to see any of you come and visit Thursday through Saturdays, 1 to 4. Now, arguably the most famous school teacher in Worcester's history was John Adams. John Adams graduated from Harvard in 1754, and the minister for the town, Thaddeus McCarty, was sent by the town to check out the brand new Harvard graduates and to see who would be a good teacher. He listened to John Adams give an address and was so impressed that he offered Adams a job on the spot, and Adams took him up on the offer. So this marker, which is by the old courthouse, commemorates the fact that Adams taught school. Now, what the marker does not say is that at the time he was teaching school, John Adams was thinking about what occupation he would pursue for the long run. He did consider medicine rather briefly, but then he decided that he would practice law. So he read law for the 3 years. Here he is, of course. And he not only learned law, and that allowed him to go back to his home in Quincy on the South Shore, but he also got an incredible political education, because in going to court, he got to see the men in Worcester County who really had a great deal of influence, and people who would have influence from the time he was there in the 1750s up until the time of the Revolution. And this is one of them. This is the man from Hardwick. This is Timothy Ruggles. And according to John Adams, he was not the most pleasant of people, which I guess we can kind of see from the picture. He was a very domineering individual. He was one of the great landholders in Worcester County, and he held office, and he was also a magistrate of the court for a while. And Timothy Ruggles decided to stay loyal to the crown. And he eventually was forced to leave. His wife stayed in Hardwick, but he left. He ended up getting a very large grant in Nova Scotia, and that's where he died some years after the Revolution. Now, he is well known to some extent, but not as well known as his daughter, who those of us who did jury duty at the old courthouse at one time probably remember this picture. This is Bathsheba Ruggles Spooner, who, along with 3 accomplices, was convicted and executed for murdering her husband in their residence in Brookfield. And as you can see, she is by the gallows. By the way, the execution took place very, very close to Union Station. And apparently she was buried, is still buried somewhere on Green Hill Park. She had a relative who married into the Green family, and after her execution, she was buried there. And what you will also see, I hope you can see in the back, is it's sort of a timeline picture. This is the actual murder right here. Now, this is right next to the courthouse, and we've all seen these markers along Route 20 for the most part. There are approximately 56 markers all the way from Fort Ticonderoga to Dorchester Heights. And we all know the story of Henry Knox and delivering the cannon from Fort Ticonderoga, which was the main reason that they decided to capture it in 1775, and bringing it all the way through the winter to Boston, where it was instrumental in creating, in sealing off the siege of Boston. Now, what's really impressive about this is not only that Henry Knox was able to bring cannon from Ticonderoga to Boston, but in the process, he only lost 1 gun. And they found it, I believe, sometime in the 1920s or 1930s in a pond in New York State. And here they are. And this is up in the upper left-hand corner. That is Fort Ticonderoga right there. Now, Timothy Bigelow was a member of the Committee of Correspondence. He led the Worcester militia to join with the Americans who had been chasing the British from Lexington and Concord all the way into Boston. And unlike a lot of people who served, many people who served in the Revolution served for only a relatively short period of time. Timothy Bigelow's service began the day of Lexington and Concord, and he stayed on active duty up until the end of the Siege of Yorktown in 1781. He was involved in the effort to capture Montreal. He was a prisoner of war, and he was in all of the major campaigns of the Continental Army. Now, this is a detail, if you will, from a painting that was found above a fireplace in a home in Worcester. And this is the location today. So this is police headquarters, and this is the parking lot, parking garage. And where this tall tree is where his house was located. Mill Brook, to which Bigelow had the water rights, runs underneath what's now Major Taylor Boulevard. And this, by the way, was the location of one of the very first factories in Worcester. The son of Stephen Salisbury, or as we often refer to him, Stephen Salisbury II, built a factory for rent at this location. And of course, because Mill Brook was still accessible, he had the water rights. And that was really, in some ways, this building, which he put up around 1830. It was the beginning of Worcester's industrial prominence. Now, this is the second Worcester County Courthouse, which went up in 1751. This is a view of what it looked like at the time. People know about the Salisbury Mansion having been moved, but there are actually many buildings in Worcester that have been moved at one time or another. And the courthouse is no exception. Courthouse was used up until about 1800. And this, by the way, is the courthouse that was closed by the Patriots in 1774, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. And it's also where Artemus Ward prevented the Shays Rebellion partisans from closing the court in 1786. But this building was used up until about 1800, and then it was moved down Main Street. There is a location today. And this building here, this was put up in 1846, and this other section of the courthouse was put up about 30 years later. When you're going down Belmont Street, if you look at the building, sometimes when the light is right, you'll actually see where this is just a little bit darker than the rest of it. And this is where it got moved to. Now, it got moved to what was then called Trumbull Square, which is not too far from City Hall. And it is now, it has been renamed to Salem Square. Now, this house was there for about 100 years. And then in about 1900, it was disassembled and it was moved back in the other direction. And this is the house today. This is 6 Massachusetts Avenue, just off Salisbury Street in Worcester, and it has been a residence all these years. Here's Isaiah Thomas. Isaiah Thomas, of course, was a printer in Boston who found that it would be a lot healthier to get away from the British. He had pretty much become an official enemy of the government. And so what he did was he moved his printing press and himself to Worcester. Now, Thomas set up his printing press in Timothy Bigelow's blacksmith shop. And he lived in a house that was occupied just a little ways down the street by Elijah Dix, who was a doctor. And this is his house. Now, Isaiah Thomas's house, I've talked about houses that were moved. This, unfortunately, was torn down in 1923. It was moved twice before it was torn down. And the only thing that remains of it are some decorative kitchen tiles, which if you come to visit the Rice Gallery at Worcester Historical Museum, you'll be able to see. So this is it in its last location, and this is the back part of the courthouse. So this is looking up from Main Street, and the opposite side of this house faces out on what's now Harvard Street. And there is the site today. And this is it being moved on one of its moves. And this is Elijah Dix's house. Elijah Dix was an interesting man. He came to Worcester in 1769. And he had an awful lot of competition. He set himself up as an apothecary. And his presence was not really welcomed. And then he did something that made him even less welcome in the town of Worcester. There was a man by the name of, and now I forget his name, William Leslie. William Leslie was only 22 when he was finally caught and convicted for the final time. He was a career criminal. He had what we would now refer to as an extended rap sheet. He had been caught stealing, forging, and burglarizing in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. Now, when he went to New Hampshire, he was imprisoned in Portsmouth. He managed to set the prison on fire and escape, but he was caught again. And while he was out of Massachusetts, unfortunately for him, they changed the crime of burglary from being a regular serious felony to being a capital crime. He was caught burglarizing a home in Worcester, and consequently was executed at the site of approximate site of today's Union Station. Now, what Elijah Dix did was he got Leslie's body, and he decided that he would give anatomy lessons. This horrified people in Worcester. And so one night, Elijah Dix looks out his window, and there is a mob in front of his house making what in those days they used to call rough music, which I guess is another term for making death threats. They caught an unfortunate dog. They hanged the dog in front of his house. And they told him if he did not give up the body of William Leslie, then he would end up being hanged himself. So he did give up the body. Now, Elijah Dix took out an ad in the Boston Gazette and Countryman Journal. And this, by the way, is where that site was. This is the, as you can see, this is the Unitarian Church, and this is the Methodist Church right here. And this is to the impartial public, in which he says that all he was trying to do was he was trying to learn to be a better doctor, and that people should not listen to the people who are trying to slander him, and that he's a very good doctor and people should come to visit him anyway. He had some very, very important connections. One of his connections, of course, was with Isaiah Thomas, because Isaiah Thomas lived in his house when Thomas first came to Worcester. But he had another connection as well. He was a very, very close friend of Dr. Joseph Warren, another doctor who also happened to be the prime revolutionary leader, along with Sam Adams in the days before the Revolution. Now, shortly before the Battle of Bunker Hill, Warren, who was a widower, sent his 2 children and his fiance to Worcester for safekeeping, so that they would not be harmed or harassed by the British. And it was in Elijah Dix's house that they were staying in the spring of 1775, and they were staying in Elijah Dix's house when Warren was killed during the Battle of Bunker Hill in June of 1775. Now, this is the Dead Horse Hill Tavern. And the Dead Horse Hill Tavern, now our tour usually does not go this far, If you're familiar with Worcester and you know where Ruggles Cemetery is, that is where one end of the tour is. The other is beyond City Hall down by Dead Horse Hill. And we do sort of a subset of that. But this was a very important site because the Haywood Tavern, like all other taverns in Worcester, took sides. This was a Tory tavern. This was a loyalist tavern. The King's Arms, despite the name, it was sometimes known as Mary Stern's Tavern, was the Patriot Tavern. And so when the court came to be held in September the 6th of 1774, the militia of the 37 towns in Worcester County came there, and they told the court officers that they were not going to be able to hold court. There had been a precedent set out in Berkshire County. In Great Barrington, they had closed the court about a month earlier. But Worcester was very, very important because Worcester was then, as now, the largest county in Massachusetts in terms of area. Worcester had not yet been designated as the heart of the Commonwealth, but it was still considered to be a very important place. So the decision on the part of the Committees of Correspondence in each of the towns to send the militia and to close the court was a really monumental undertaking. Now, we've all heard about the Committees of Correspondence and that their main purpose was they were going to correspond among themselves. They were going to communicate what was going on in their town. They were going to exchange information. But they were actually a bit more than that, because in Massachusetts by 1774, outside of the town of Boston, the royal government had no authority. Massachusetts, in all of the towns outside of Boston, was basically being run by the Committees of Correspondence. So, oh, and by the way, Worcester had not only a Committee of Correspondence, but it also had a group that called itself the American Political Society, which was one of the most radical groups of patriots in Massachusetts. There were maybe about 100 members on their rolls. Some of them, such as Timothy Bigelow and Isaiah Thomas, were more active than others. Their papers, by the way, are available to read at the American Antiquarian, both in their original form, and then somebody in the early 1900s did a typescript transcription. But they were very radical and very influential. So they are pushing people to say, we are not going to let the court be open. And by the way, court came to Worcester 4 times a year. So from 4 times a year during court week, everyone from Worcester came, from Worcester County came in for court business. Usually the business that was done was people were suing each other. In Massachusetts, in the 18th century, the preferred method of trying to collect a late debt was to sue somebody. And it was such a widespread practice that when the courts were finally closed by the Patriots, they asked everybody in Worcester and the other counties to stop suing each other for a while for debt until they could get the courts up and running again. So the court officers are told that you have to close the court, and they didn't quite know what to do, so they adjourned to the Haywood Tavern, which is now Dead Horse Hill. Now, this is across the street. This is at the corner of Pleasant Street and, I'm sorry, Main Street and Elm. And this is where Mary Stern's Royal Tavern was standing. And this, by the way, is one of those famous places where, they say George Washington slept here. He actually slept there. It was the headquarters for the Committee of Correspondence and for the American Political Society. There is a rather large rock and almost like a little garden near the corner of Main and Elm to commemorate this place. Now, this is from an earlier incident earlier in 1774 that occurred at the Haywood Tavern. This is the town book, and the Loyalist drafted as part of the official town minutes a protest against the Committees of Correspondence, and it was entered into the town records. Shortly thereafter, the members of the Committee of Correspondence caught up with the Loyalists who had done this, and the town clerk, who was a Loyalist, was forced to dip his fingers in ink to blot out the offending passage. And fortunately for all of us, this particular book has survived. Now, this is across the street from what's now City Hall. This is the Gardner-Chandler mansion. The Chandlers and the Paynes and the Ruggles were the major Tories in Worcester. And these were the people actually that John Adams spent most of his time with. He read law with the Paynes and with the Chandlers. Now, this building, unfortunately, was torn down in the 19th century. And this is what it looks like now. This is an item of clothing. This is property of the Worcester Historical Museum. And this is Chandler's waistcoat. And this is the Royal Coat of Arms, which for some reason was not destroyed. This is something that was actually contained within the entryway of the Chandler Mansion. This is the meeting house. Now you will see in the next slide, Isaiah Thomas getting up on the entryway. Isaiah Thomas, very early on, say about 1775, got himself named through the good offices of his friend Benjamin Franklin, named as the postmaster of Worcester. And after the Declaration of Independence was approved, copies were printed, sent to the different colonies. And because he was a postmaster, Isaiah Thomas was able to find the postwriter. He asked, or perhaps demanded, the copy, and he got up on the porch here of the meeting house, and he gave the first public reading of the Declaration of Independence in Massachusetts, perhaps the first public reading in New England. And this, of course, is the site of the meeting house today, City Hall. Timothy Bigelow, I mentioned that he was a patriot who served from day one until the conclusion of the Siege of Yorktown. He was a POW. He was captured in Canada, and he had, I think that when he came out of the war, he was worn down physically. Today, perhaps, based on some of his experiences, he might have been diagnosed with PTSD. He had a very, very difficult time adjusting to civilian life after the war. His business was pretty much gone. He was given some rather large land grants in Vermont. As a matter of fact, the city of Montpelier is the site of his original Vermont grant. But he found himself in debt. The people who had been his friends, to include Isaiah Thomas and Stephen Salisbury, among others, apparently did nothing to help him. He died in 1790 in debtor's prison. And his property was later purchased by the second generation of the Salisburys. This monument went up in the 1860s, and it's still there, of course. Here's the Oaks on Lincoln Street. And this was owned by the Payne family. It was in the process of being constructed in 1774 when the courts were closed. And the Paynes, the elder Payne was actually one of the magistrates of the court, resigned his commission as a magistrate, as they all did in September 1774. He did not, unlike his son, go off. He did stay in Worcester and was pretty much allowed to remain. Now, his son became Surgeon General for the British Army. during the American Revolution. But he was eventually allowed to come back in, and he died, I believe, sometime around 1828, a resident of Worcester. Some of these people, unlike Timothy Ruggles, who went to Nova Scotia, some of these people who elected to come back were forgiven for their part, and they lived out their lives in Worcester. This is the tomb of Isaiah Thomas in Rural Cemetery. Now, this is the Thomas Hancock house. Thomas Hancock owned a large amount of property in Worcester, and he also owned this house. Now, this house is another one that was moved. The original location of the Thomas Hancock house was on Lincoln Street. So if you go up Lincoln Street and you're at the DAR headquarters, you've gone too far. It's about halfway between the DAR building and the bottom of the hill on Lincoln Street. But this was moved in 1846 and torn down about 1930. Now, the interesting thing about this is that Thomas Hancock and his wife had no children. What he did was he adopted his orphaned nephew, John Hancock. So this became the John Hancock house eventually. And when John Hancock and Sam Adams fled Lexington in April of 1775, they stopped at this house on their way to join up with the Continental Congress that was meeting in Philadelphia. Also, John Hancock owned about 150 acres that stretched from Lincoln Square just about all the way to the Holden Worcester town line. And he sold that land, about 150 acres plus, to Stephen Salisbury, who farmed that land. So Salisbury not only ran his store and had his residence in what became Lincoln Square, but he also farmed that area. And then over the years, the Salisburys gave or sold that land. What's now the North Works, Institute Park, the Art Museum grounds, WPI campus, all of that was originally Salisbury land, which he had purchased from John Hancock.
Robert, I have one question.
Yes.
So did John Hancock grow up in Worcester?
No, he did not. He apparently came to visit, but he did not live here. One connection though about John Hancock, John Hancock's relatives inherited the trunk in which he had all of his papers. He and Sam Adams had a trunk full of papers, sometimes what is referred to as the box full of treason. And that particular trunk that they left in Lexington when the British came in, fortunately, Paul Revere and another man managed to hide it from the British. That trunk went down to Philadelphia. It came back. It was passed on to relatives. They gave it to the American Antiquarian. And in the 1890s, when the American Antiquarian was deaccessioning its objects because it wanted to go to just printed items, they gave it to the Worcester Society of Antiquity. And we take it out once a year. So if you would like to see John Hancock's trunk, which did make a brief appearance in Worcester in 1775, please join us at Worcester Historical Museum on Monday, the 18th, where we will have Daniel Berger Jones, who has been with us a number of times, and he will do his impression of John Hancock. Now, this is the Marriott. As you see, this is taken from across the street by the old armory. And this park that you see right here, that's where the Thomas Hancock House was. This is the only thing that remains of the Thomas Hancock House. It is at the Smithsonian. I saw online at an auctioneer's place, an auctioneer was claiming to have one of the mantelpieces that went with this house. And he was only asking about $3,000 for it. And to be honest, if I had had room, I probably would have bought it just to have it. But it is what we can guarantee remains of that house is at the Smithsonian now. I don't know if it's on display. And here's the John Hancock trunk.
And you said on April 18th, that's going to be?
April 18th from 10 until 2 o'clock. Generally speaking, we have it on display for a full week, but this year we're only having it for the one day. Now, the gauntlet was the ordeal that the 37 militia companies, which totaled, by the way, about 4,600 men who came to Worcester on that one day. And it was very, very well organized. The militia companies were instructed that they were not to bring their weapons into the town. A couple of the town militias did not get the word until late. What they did was they ended up keeping their muskets in a couple of barns just outside the town limits. But they were very well disciplined. They behaved fairly well. What happens, though, is that they're all milling about in the street. And so the leaders of the militias tell them to come up to where Lincoln Square is now. And the majority of them basically sat on the lawn in front of Stephen Salisbury's Salisbury mansion. Now, the mansion, of course, was a store as well as a residence. And because, for example, militiamen were required to have a certain amount of powder and shot, and some of them did not have as much as they were supposed to, they went into Stephen Salisbury's and they bought powder and shot. And they bought other sundry items, perhaps candy, perhaps things that they needed for the home. It appears that they also drank up, or I should say they purchased all of Stephen Salisbury's rum. So that he wrote in a letter that evening to his brother, two major things. One was that he had 1,000 pounds in cash, which was an enormous amount of money to be having in cash, and he was worried about what to do with it. And then he also told his older brother Samuel that he had sold all of the rum in the house, but he specified that he had indeed sold it at retail and not wholesale prices. So the store did very, very well. In any event, down at the opposite end here, beyond City Hall, is where the Haywood Tavern is. And the magistrates, the officers of the court, are trying to decide what to do. They decide that, in fact, they will resign their commissions and they will apologize for having served the king, and that they will not open the court. And they couldn't say this once. There was a gauntlet of 37 militia companies all down Main Street. And at each new militia company, they had to stop and they had to repeat their apology and repeat their resignation. Now, a lot of these guys were, I'm sure, quite tired. We know that some of them had been drinking, and they were all pretty aggrieved at the officers of the court. So this reenactment that they did a few years ago is looking like a pretty dignified affair. By the way, all of the officers of the court were loyalists. They were Tories, except for one man, which was Artemus Ward, who was in the Patriot faction. And actually, Artemus Ward was pretty cool with all this going on, although his judicial colleagues were pretty ill at ease. This is how it was reenacted a few years ago. This is how it probably looked. There was a term I used earlier called rough music, sometimes known as skimmington. And it is people making a lot of noises, sometimes just banging pans or pots, or yelling, or perhaps uttering threats. And so it may very well have looked like this. But fortunately for the officers of the court, their only major casualty was Mr. Payne, who, in taking his hat off, lost his wig and had difficulty putting it back on. His dignity was damaged, but fortunately for him, that was it, because it could have ended up like this, with tar and feathers. And this is from a contemporary illustration of the fate of certain Tories. And as you can see in this particular case, he's being forced to drink tea. And that concludes the virtual tour of Revolutionary Worcester.
Okay, I have one question, which that Timothy Bigelow statue, that memorial looks very nice. Where is that located?
That's located in Worcester Common.
Worcester Common. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was originally, like so many people, he was originally buried in the Common. And then around 1860 or 61, there was a public subscription which was pretty much chaired or organized by some of his descendants. And they put that up, and his body was moved and put under the monument.
And can you describe your walking tour? Like what's the route? Where do you take people?
Yes. What we do is we start at the Salisbury Mansion, and then we walk down Highland Street at the courthouse, the old courthouse. We take a right, and in that corner, we talk about the Samuel Adams marker. There is a marker, which is not in this virtual tour, showing the route that George Washington took after he slept at Mary Stern's Tavern on his way to take command of the Continental Army. There is the Knox monument. Then we proceed down to the courthouse. We talk about the closing of the court. We talk about the work and the travels of Isaiah Thomas, because we can see the location of his house from there. We walk a little further down, and we stop at the Methodist Church, which is where Elijah Dix lived. And then we come back up, and we go past the War Memorial Auditorium, and we go to the location of the United Congregational Church, what for years was called the Central Church. And from there, I can point out where the Thomas Hancock house was. And then we go back up. We don't go up Highland Street. It's a lot harder going back up than it is coming down. So what we do is we go up Institute Road, then we take a left on Harvard Street, and then we take a right on Highland. It takes about an hour and a quarter. It's taken sometimes a little bit more than that. It all depends on how many questions people have. Generally speaking, we have usually a full house, which is like 10 to 15 people. And we run it every other Saturday. We'll do it 3 times Patriots Day week, and then we do it every other Saturday up until November. We've had times in November where the rain was pelting and the wind was blowing so hard that the rain was going sideways, and we still had 15 people, all equipped with umbrellas. So it's turned out to be pretty popular. So it's about an hour and a quarter, and admission is $10.
And refresh my memory, where is Dead Horse Hill Pub currently located? That's that site of the Haywood Tavern.
It's on Main Street.
Okay.
It's on Main Street. It's on the same side of the street as City Hall.
Okay.
And it's not far from the old Den Holmes.
Oh, okay. Okay. And we in October had the author who wrote the newer book on Bathsheba Spooner, and we were interested to learn that the 2 British soldiers and the colonial soldier, whatever, the 3 people who committed the murder got caught because they basically blabbed about it at the 2 taverns,
Yes.
the King's Arms and the Haywood.
Yes. The British soldiers were prisoners of war from the surrender of Burgoyne's army at Saratoga. And there are numerous accounts. Somebody actually wrote a book about those British POWs who ended up in Pennsylvania. And apparently wherever they went, they created problems for everyone. There's also, if you've ever been out to, it is the town west of the Quabbin River, where Quabbin Reservoir, where the museum is, the Quabbin Museum. And there is, they moved a couple of houses that were taken from the towns that had to be evacuated. And across the road from that Quabbin Reservoir Museum is a little marker that says, past this point, British prisoners of war from Saratoga were marched. And also in Cambridge, just off Harvard Square, there's a marker for the house where Burgoyne and a couple of the generals were held in gentlemanly confinement. But yeah, something about the POWs. There were actually a substantial number of Hessian soldiers, German mercenaries, who decided not to return to Germany and who were POWs and elected to stay in America. That was not the case with British POWs. Very, very few of them stayed. So they were rather a difficult bunch. They were used as hired labor, which was the case with the two soldiers who were involved in Mr. Spooner's murder.
Oh, very good. And let's see, Peter Allen wanted to know about the many acres farmed at the Salisbury mansion. Was there farmland there?
Yeah, absolutely. As the town grew, the town radiated at first from north to south. So basically the northern, I won't say the absolute northernmost part, but the northernmost part of settlement was from what's now Lincoln Square going south towards City Hall and beyond. The 150 acres, that was almost entirely uncultivated. Nothing was done with it. It's just land that Thomas Hancock had, which passed on to his nephew. It was operated as a farm by the Salisburys. Now, what happened is, as you get into the 19th century, the land starts to get used up for things. What's now the North Works was originally a factory that Stephen Salisbury built for Mr. Washburn. There was also, I believe, a factory for rent up at that point. What's now Salisbury Pond it's an artificial pond. It was created by the second Stephen Salisbury to help provide water power. And then the land sort of got parceled out. Some of it got sold. The land that the Art Museum is on, that was given to the Art Museum by the third and last Stephen Salisbury. And then, of course, the second Stephen Salisbury was one of the founders of WPI. And he gave land to that. He gave Institute Park. Now, an interesting story about this, and we're glad things worked out the way they did. The third Stephen Salisbury offered the land that the mansion was sitting on, where the Boys Club is now. He offered it to the city of Worcester to build a new city hall. And they turned him down. So they built it where the original meeting house had been. And the Salisburys were extremely generous to the city and the organizations of Worcester. However, a lot of that land north of Salisbury Mansion was not being used. And some people have, I guess, rather cynically suggested that the reason that third Stephen Salisbury offered to give the land to the city to build City Hall was that he could get rid of the rest of his land up there and sell it at a very good profit. But that was a part that got settled very, very slowly over the years. And basically what he owned was where the Boys Club is, all the way up to approximately where the Salisbury Mansion is today, and out to Holden to the left of what's now Grove Street. So the land where Rural Cemetery, for example, is, that was somebody else's land.
Wow, that was a big piece of land.
It was a big farm. It was a very, very substantial farm.
Excellent. Well, I don't think there's any other questions. I want to thank you very much. It was very informative, and hopefully we've attracted some people to go on your tour, on your walking tour. That begins April 18th, and then every 2 weeks on Saturday.
We're having it April the 18th, April the 21st, which is the following Thursday, April the 23rd, which is Saturday, and then every other Saturday after that till November. And you can check on our Facebook page, because we do announce when we're going to have the walks.
And is the Facebook page Salisbury Mansion, or what is it called?
It's Worcester Historical Museum.
Worcester Historical Museum. Okay, excellent. Well, you're definitely getting some accolades here. I just want to mention for the Historical Society, we are actually producing 2 programs in April, but one of them is for the schools. For the 5th grade at Mill Pond, we're combining with the Westborough Women's Club and the Fuller Foundation, and we're sponsoring a living history presentation on Krista McAuliffe. So they understand her history as a teacher, a pioneer, and a local hero. And that program is called Soaring, Challenger Soaring with Krista McAuliffe, put on by Judith Calaora of History at Play. That'll be for the 5th grade. Beyond that, Sunday, April 24th, we're going to sponsor a historic house tour of Kirkside, which is at 8 Church Street. It's the current home of Right at Home Home Care, and it is a Forbes family home built in 1917. And we're going to have docents giving a tour that will include a history of the Forbes family. And that will be open to members first because we have a limit of about 25 people, and then we'll open it to the public. So, so I really invite I thank everybody for coming this evening, and just encourage you to look forward to some of our other programs. And thank you, Bob, for doing an excellent job, and you're a wealth of information. And, you know, really, it's amazing to see the history of Worcester. You know, it's people come from all over the country, and they love to come to Boston because American history, you know, started here. But Worcester was definitely a major player. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. And I wish you a good evening.
Thank you very much.